It's no secret that players generally look to be in agreement that some champions are simply not meant for play at higher elo. Countless videos were made over the years on why picks like Garen and Teemo were never going to be seen in pro play or even the Apex tiers, either because they're just far more practical choices or because the champion in question depends on punishing enemy mistakes more than rewarding your own good play, of which you're bound to find far less mistakes that you can capitalize on the higher up you go. That doesn't necessarily imply the champions are bad, it's just the nature of the game. For the longest time ever, Darius also happened to be in that category. Often compared to Garen both in lore and in-game for their many similarities, Darius too was only really acknowledged for his capability at around maybe the low ends of Master Elo at best, with little to no representation in Grandmaster, Challenger, and Pro Play as a result of his overly linear and counterable game plan. But throughout February and most of March so far, we've seen him progressively become more and more of a threat even at the very highest skill brackets in the game. And while at the time of writing this he hasn't made a splash in pro play, there's a chance he might unless Riot decides to nerf him immediately in patch 15.6, 25.6, whatever the hell you want to call it. Normally, I don't really talk about specific meta developments on this channel, but I think the chain of events that took place to make a once top elo unviable champion suddenly become public enemy number 1 is worth covering because of how interesting it is. So let's go over the meteoric rise of Darius from noob stopper to top rank terror. Starting off with the reasons why Darius wasn't considered viable in top tier would be a good place to begin. To clarify, Darius has been seen in Grandmaster Plus from time to time. When I say unviable, I don't mean a 0% win rate troll pick if you manage to play him up there. What I mean by that is, generally speaking, the extent of a champion's capability is measured by how high their ceiling can be reached on average. For example, if you take a look at OPGG's champion leaderboards and search up someone like say Fiora, you're consistently going to find more Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger players who one-trick her, whereas if you try to sort by perhaps a Mumu, you're far less likely to find him in Grandmaster and Challenger. There might be one with a pocket of Mumu, but across the board, like just scrolling through each one, many more Challenger and Grandmaster Fiora players than there are Mumu players, and it's easy to understand why. Darius historically was closer to a Mumu in Apex tier viability than Fiora. For starters, he's a juggernaut, a class notorious for consisting of many stat checkers who all have the same basic principle of being immobile but insanely durable and damaging champions. Such power comes at the expense of skill expression in that there really isn't a whole lot you can do on the champion that isn't beelining towards someone and hoping you can survive their pressure long enough for your pressure to kill them first. Garen, Mordekaiser, Mundo, Sett, Volibear, that's pretty much how they play. Darius is no exception. To be fair, he was even less viable in high elo and pro play before 2015's infamous Juggernaut rework, where he subsequently became one of the most contested top tiers in the game during that season's World Championship. Outside of a brief stint in 2018, you pretty much never saw him, and whenever you did, his performance was, less than flattering. Even though he possesses considerably higher carry potential than other juggernauts, the caveat is that most of his pressure is backloaded. If you were to disregard the massive AD boost and instant 5 stacks he gets from Noxian Might, Darius' base kit isn't really that strong, so in most circumstances, the 1v9 pen and kill fantasy he was built up to be practically never happens, especially against better players who know how to play around him in both lane and in teamfights. Missing even one decimate results in a detrimental loss of DPS, as that's where the bulk of his trade power is housed. Not only would you deal merely a third of the damage you would normally do if you were to land the sweet spot, but you also miss a bleed stack and a 15% missing health heal, making landing it a crucial priority. Likewise, making it a crucial priority to avoid getting hit by it on the opponent's end. Of course, on the flip side, there probably isn't a single Juggernaut champion more destructive than a full stack Darius, especially at later stages of the game. If he's in Noxian Might, your only two courses of action are to get rid of him quickly before he can steamroll, or disengage until the buff duration gets exhausted, neither of which is easy to pull off against a champion who usually takes an entire team's worth of abilities to burst down, and almost always takes Ghost and/or Face Rush to make himself difficult to kite. The reason he struggled to find any meaningful success in high elo is because most skilled players know how to deny him what he wants. Apprehend is a fantastic ability at getting people close to Darius, but the relatively short range and high cooldown on it makes it easy to whiff punish him. Also, when you consider it's the only way he can guarantee the sweet spot on his Q. But if Darius has all these weaknesses, being easy to kite, slow to ramp up, and playing very linearly, how the hell did he randomly become super insanely overpowered 55% win rate, 50% ban rate overnight, and in jungle of all places? There's a very simple answer to that. They just took away the weaknesses. To start, one major thing keeping Darius in check is the abundance of counterpicks in top lane. Statistically, Darius is a very strong champion in top lane all the way up to even Masters, hovering around a steady 50.5 to 51% win rate. Quite impressive for an immobile bruiser. Compared to other juggernauts who are far more exploitable, Darius is one of the more consistent ones. All the same, he's a juggernaut through and through, vulnerable to counterpicks just like any of his peers. The enemy top lane could screw him over by picking Wukong, Riven, Warwick, Vayne, Cannon, GP, Vladimir, what have you, and give him a hard time in lane. Since he's forced to take Ghost to alleviate his poor mobility, scoring an early kill or gank on Darius can set him tremendously far behind due to not having teleport. So despite being ever so slightly overtuned, he doesn't spiral out of control by way of the very nature of top lane, making it unsustainable for him. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, Darius' poor initiation. Mobility has never been more prevalent than it is now. Champions can dash and kite him like there's no tomorrow. Ranged champions who can dash are even worse. It's not unusual for Darius to drop to half health before he can so much as get in range to attack his target, which is why he often has to build full tank after a damage item or two, relying on his base strength and the attack buff on his passive to supplement. But that in and of itself poses another issue. Problem number 3, Darius' backloader pressure. While not obligatory for him to wait until 5 stacks to use Noxie and Guillotine, as he can always use it at 3 or 4 stacks on a target who's already sufficiently injured, most of the time Darius has to spend a good 4 to 5 seconds getting 5 stacks before he actually becomes a threat. During this time, other enemy champions can blow him up quickly, especially in teamfights. Not only is mobility more prevalent than ever, but so is damage. Everyone's getting one-shotted and tank busted in record time. Percent health and true damage are being given out like candy these days, with armor and magic pen options also being the most prolific it's ever been. Darius could straight up die before even getting a chance to hit 5 stacks, let alone getting his target low enough to execute them with an ultimate. These 3 weaknesses are what contained him from otherwise becoming a major threat. But following a series of changes they subtly put on him over the years, players have begun to notice an easy loophole in bypassing not 1, not 2, but all 3 weaknesses at once, resulting in the highest pick and ban rate Darius has had since getting mid-scoped 10 years ago. As of 15.5, he's sitting at a 20% pick rate, 53% win rate, and 45% ban rate in Diamond Plus. Inconceivable to see on Darius of all people. The changes that brought him into this state of dominance were numerous, but the ones in particular I want to call to attention are version 10.4, 10.5, 11.8, Season 13, and Season 14. As part of Riot's initiative to make the jungle more accessible, they sought to make it so more champions can be usable in the jungle. That's why nowadays so many cast members have abilities that do bonus damage to monsters. Darius arguably got the biggest buff. Hemorrhage was buffed in 10.4 to deal bonus damage to monsters. Not a significant amount, but it began the push. In addition, Decimate was given the ability to heal off large monsters, making his jungle clear much more sustainable and also objective securing more safe as well, since he would barely suffer any injury while taking Dragon or Herald. 10.5 raised the bleed damage to 175%, and then 11.8 when raised it to 300%. But did you know at one point on the PBE, it actually used to be 500%? Yeah, at one point, they flirted with the idea of Darius' passive doing 5 times its damage on monsters. He had by far the fastest clear in the game. Then in Season 13, the jungle was given a full rework. Purchasing a jungle item would now give you a small pet that provided special buffs depending on what you offered. Said pet would also help junglers clear camps by assisting in damage and also regenerating health and mana throughout the process. Beyond that, a mid-evolution smite was introduced, Unleash Smite, making it a combat summoner that provided a tiny slow and burst of damage. Previously, you would have to take specifically Chilling Smite to get the slow. Now you didn't have to. All smites can now apply the slow at base. More importantly, upgrading to Primal Smite granted you a bonus passive based on which one you chose, the one in particular helping out Darius being Dustwalker's Gate, the blue smite. More on that later. Season 14 would then introduce Void Grubs, an early game objective that would assist in tower pressure towards the mid to late game, along with giving junglers an actual incentive to hang out around topside before 20 minutes. Prior, playing Darius jungle was tantamount to jungle Yuumi. His clear was too slow, thus he took too much damage when clearing, and his ganks were poor as well. Thanks to these changes, he had the fastest clear and some of the best engages in the game. The first problem of Darius being kept in check by the nature of top lane forcing you to confront your opponent head-on was circumvented, as Darius no longer had to face a lane opponent constantly while jungling. Even if you did play a jungler who could pose a threat to him in the early game, that he didn't have to deal with you at all times meant he could farm and amass gold throughout a game with minimal, if any, resistance. Problem 1 was no longer a problem anymore. Thanks to the monster-empowered bleed damage and his Q now working on large and epic jungle monsters, Darius' clear speed was every bit as good as power farming junglers like Kayn, Graves, and Shyvana. Not just that, but he was the best champion at taking grubs. Positioning yourself dead center of them guaranteed a triple heal, allowing him to clear grubs insanely quickly, but also making it very dangerous to challenge him for doing so. He could be at low health and instantly recover half his HP with a single Q before turning attention to you and busting you down. He could easily sustain off Otacon, Dragon, and Rift Herald too, making him one of, if not the best objective taker in the game right now. Darius' poor initiation would also be addressed, funnily enough without even the need for Ghost. He would take Face Rush instead of Conqueror, providing him with ample movement speed and effectively slow immunity as well. Then he would rush Ghostblade to supply him with a ton of movement speed from the base stat, the out of combat boost, and then of course the item active. Combining all of its tempo boosting properties together, Ghostblade is, for all intents and purposes, a shorter lasting but nearly equivalent item version of the Ghost Summoner spell. It may even be better actually. Considering Darius buys it by around level 9ish, it's 24% movement speed for 6 seconds, plus the initial flat 20 out of combat, compared to the Summoner spell's 35% movement speed for 10 seconds. The only difference is, one has a 4-minute cooldown, the other has only a 45-second cooldown. When you also account for Smite having a 20% slow, it's almost as if he still has Ghost. He would then compound his tempo by building other speed boosting items like Swifties and Deadman's Blade. Deadman's in particular was changed to also provide movement speed even if you had no stacks of the ramping passive, and it also has 25% slow resist. Deadman's plus Swifties and Face Rush made slows of any strength practically ineffective. Oh, and also there was the triple movement speed rune build as well, Nimbus Cloak, Water Walking, and Celerity. All of these put together gave Darius faster tempo than even Bear Stance Udyr. I'm sorry, Ram Stance Udyr, I'm still used to calling it Bear Stance. A Darius with permanent Ghost active is definitely not something to laugh at, but I haven't even gotten to the one aspect that truly solidified this build, Gustwalker's Gate. Blue Smite, when fully upgraded, gives you 45% bonus movement speed while in a brush that persists at a decaying rate for 2 seconds after leaving the brush. Furthermore, killing a large monster raises it to a staggering 60%. Forget Ghost, Darius now had home guards at all times. This motherfucker ran at you like Five Nights at Freddy's jump scare ran at you. He could charge at you faster than Warwick chasing a low health target, and even if you had any slow, he could ignore it through Face Rush, Deadmans, and Swifties. No need for a gap closer or even apprehend, he was a gap closer. Finally, backloaded damage. As mentioned earlier, the main counterplay to Darius is that he takes time to do damage, so if you're at full health, you don't have to start sweating until you drop to around tap, giving you time to disengage or burst him first. However, as a jungler, when Darius is ganking, the person he's trying to gank not only might be already injured, but they're at a numbers disadvantage, which is exactly where Juggernauts are at their best. If you burn all your resources trying to fend off Darius, his team gets the green light to take you out. Conversely, if you're too focused on your lane opponent, Darius gets to free fire on you. Either way, it's checkmate. As for in the mid to late game, like I said before, Darius typically loses half his HP just to get in range to attack you, at which point he might die before he even gets going. But with the sheer tempo he has through Blue Smite, Face Rush, and his items, he can get right up in his opponent's face without losing much health if at all, and he's still as tanky as before. The ideal strategy against Darius is to all-in him when he's at low health. All-inning a Darius at full health is just flat out suicidal, but that's the situation he forces on you. Not a single champion in God's green earth has the speed to outrun a Nimbus Cloak, Celerity, Water Walking, Ghostblade Swifties, Deadman's Gustwalker Darius. Even Hecarim can't outrun that. Imagine a mobile champs like Jinx or Lux. In an ironic twist of fate, it was slow and insidious, but over time Riot unknowingly engineered the perfect set of circumstances to functionally override every single weakness Darius has. They took away his vulnerability to counter matchups by allowing him to be played in the one role that doesn't force you to confront your corresponding opponent at all times. They took away his engage problem, or lack thereof, by affording him access to so many sources of tempo and slow resist that he can literally outspeed everyone else in the game. They took away his slow DPS start by allowing the player to either A. always fight with the numbers advantage and typically engage on a target who's already been damaged a bit, or B. reduce the time it takes for him to get to his target through his overwhelming speed, thus giving him more health and by extension more time to get to his backloaded power spike. It was a culmination of factors that just so happened to work together to turn a champion who wasn't even meant to be played in the jungle in the first place to become arguably the most dominant jungler League has ever seen in the past half-decade. I don't think there's been a jungler with a pick rate, ban rate, and win rate this high in years. By the time you see this, I'm sure nerfs will most certainly be incoming for Darius in 15.6. I mean, it better. If it doesn't, then we have a problem here. I think the best way to shut him down would be to nerf his passive monster damage. It's more a problem with Darius being simply too strong for the jungle and less about the runes and items. Either way, what a time to be alive for Darius of all champions to be public enemy number 1. It reminds me of those documentary videos that Exile and Myth make on champions that went crazy back in the day. Short-lived as it may be, this definitely will go down in history as one of the biggest what the f moments in League. What do you guys think about Jungle Darius? Do you think this is just a freak accident, or do you suspect Riot did this on purpose? Let me know in the comments down below. We're gonna wrap up for today though, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.